Welcome to Conveyancing Matters, where this week we are talking to Stephen Larcombe. Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Good morning.
Stephen, hello. Welcome. Lovely to see you. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
How are you, Stu?
Yeah, I'm very good. How are you? You okay?
Yeah, I'm all right, thank you.
Good.
So we've got the absolutely lovely Stephen Larcombe joining us, coming out from behind the shadows, Stephen. So it's absolutely lovely to see you and to welcome you. So, would you just, for the benefit of the people who know perhaps about you via your posts and the Property Lawyers Alliance on LinkedIn, just maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to sort of set up the PLA.
Thank you, Lorraine. I was involved with a law firm that was part of a larger practice near Cambridge, and we demerged in 1990. I was there for several decades. I disposed of the law practice in 2015, went on to become a locum for a law firm on the edge of London. In addition, I became a consultant to an environmental charity, and recently I've become a governor for a special needs school, all of which are absolutely fascinating, and they all sort of provide a valuable perspective in terms of what I do. A few years ago, a group of legal practitioners, solicitors, other legal executives, licensed conveyancers, became aware that information and other things were being promoted by certain groups, and then it became clear that the Law Society was proposing to carry out major changes to the TA6 form, which caused a number of property lawyers in particular a considerable degree of concern. So much so that we started campaigning to get the Law Society to think again. There was a special general meeting last year, and as a result of our campaign, although we lost the vote at the special general meeting for a vote of no confidence, the Law Society did in fact engage in a consultation with members of the legal profession concerning the TA6 form, and we're obviously awaiting the outcome, the ultimate result of that, the consultation, because the Law Society at some point in the near future will be issuing a revised TA6. But that was the issue that started the Property Lawyers Alliance. We're very much a values-based organisation, and we're now turning our attention to a number of other issues, probably the most important of which is our campaign to cut the suffocating volume of red tape, which at the moment we take the view is the number one factor in slowing down conveyancing, not digitalization and not a lack of appropriate software, but the anti money laundering mountain that now exists, which has sort of accumulated over several years. The campaign has involved writing to local law societies, it's involved writing to members of parliament, and we're already in communication and indeed in correspondence with one of the Treasury ministers. So our voices are being heard. And incidentally, because we are a values-based organisation, we don't have any sponsorship. The main thing that motivates us, the main thing that finances us, apart from very, very modest subscription from our members, is a passionate belief in the rule of law.
Well, the AML, Stu, is something very close to your heart as a law firm owner, isn't it? And just the absolute overwhelming amount of sort of regulatory burden that's been imposed on law firms, and particularly, of course, property lawyers.
Absolutely. And Steve and I were discussing before we came on air, it's something we're not trained to do particularly, pre working in the profession. We do our CPD obviously, and we learn about money laundering, but it's not something that's at the heart of the qualification in terms of being a property lawyer. And now the onerous task of going through reams and reams and reams of information in relation to source of funds and source of wealth, as you say, Stephen, has got out of hand, hasn't it? And you're quite right. I completely agree with you. When we talk about the length of how long a transaction takes to complete, this has to be a major part of the expanded time it now takes. And I think the thing that people don't really understand outside of maybe our profession is that it's such something that is ongoing all the time. It's not just at the start, it's when you get the deposit, it's when you get the completion funds. You've got to check, did it come from the accounts that you'd seen previously, so on and so forth. You then got a giftor, you've then got to look at his money or her money, where did that come from? It's not something that is the proverbial tick box that people maybe consider it to be.
I think, Stephen, you're onto the thing, and I think this is such an important message because, the whole AML burden on law firms, it reflects in different ways. So, for example, I've been teaching, I've had 1 day introductory courses to conveyancing, either for paralegals or for qualified lawyers, literally for years, literally for 30 years. And the bit of and the basic structure of the conveyancing transaction is the same. But the one thing I've noticed is that the way my training day pans out, Stephen, I'm now spending most of the morning talking about the AML responsibilities. And it's a tiny example, but it's just a slightly different perspective on the same thing. But I think the key message, and I think you're absolutely right, in terms of the number one factor in slowing down conveyancing, I would absolutely say that that's the key message. But Stephen, I suppose, to be devil's advocate, do you feel, and please don't misinterpret this because it sounds a bit rude, I don't mean it to, but do you feel you might be fighting a losing battle, but it's a battle worth fighting? How do you get over the fact that the AML burden seems so huge that how could we possibly fight against it?
Well, I suppose it's a bit like when you take the analogy of the medical profession and doctors. It's a bit like saying to a surgeon, we've decided that we want you to operate twice as quickly. This is the decision of government, this is the decision of the General Medical Council. And then when he's in the operating theatre, you tie one hand behind his back. It's exactly the same thing. I asked a colleague of the Property Lawyers Alliance, would you please get a stiff drink and count up the pages of AML guidance, which now regulates what property lawyers do? And he said it came to just over 1,500 pages. And when you add up, all the guidances, the international notes, blah, 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 you can only punish somebody so many times. You can only wrap so much red tape. It's a bit, around anything before it gets out of hand. And a point we would make, and we've made to government and the Ministry of Housing and the Treasury, the Property Lawyers Alliance doesn't oppose the principle of measures being put in place to combat money laundering. What we oppose, first of all, is the massive overkill which now exists, and secondly, the massive over-enforcement of the AML regime, because it's become almost masochistic. There are so many firms. I mean, there was a mention in one of the legal periodicals this morning that the SRA has issued another £100,000 worth of fines. And the point is, and this is the key point, the key point is that there are virtually zero number of cases which have been enforced by the SRA in recent years for actual money laundering. These are all punishments being handed out because of a lack of red tape, which in my view is a nonsense. If you had, whole cohorts of lawyers intimately involved with money laundering, then nobody could be surprised if we had 1,500 pages of money laundering guidance. But there hasn't been. That's the point. And the other thing is, and this is the other key point politically, which we've made to the government, and some MPs are making on our behalf, which is, on the one hand, you've got the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, and the Housing Minister saying, we want to slash red tape, we're going for growth, build, 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 instead of which we've got the Treasury saying, we want more red tape, we're going to wrap you up in even more red tape, more red tape, more red tape. It's a fundamental contradiction at the core of government policy. And sadly, and this isn't particularly a political point, because I would say if it was the Conservatives were in power, and I did say it, this government isn't very good at technical stuff, because
well, the previous government wasn't either. If the Building Safety Act is anything to go by,
they're competing with each other. So who's worse? I mean, it's a bit like, just to give you another example, the government has called for build, 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 but they rather stupidly, in the context of the planning regime, put caps on the amount that housing associations could charge their social housing tenants. That had ultimately a knock-on effect, because if you can't get the income, it means you can't get the housing associations wanting to join in to brand new developments as part of Section 106 obligations. Section 106, your typical new build development, 1,000 houses, 100 houses, whatever. You've got housing associations which are going to deliver the affordable housing element. But because successive governments interfered, because they didn't know what they were doing, they're thick, a lot of developers are struggling to develop. They can't get the housing associations. So the real point I'm coming to here, there's something I pointed out to government, the Property Lawyers Alliance pointed out to government, is that consult with the people who know what they're doing. If you want to make buying a house quicker, then talk to the lawyers. They know where corners can be cut. Get rid of, for example, stupid things like parts of the environmental legislation. The Environmental Protection Act makes no allowance for a member of the public buying a number 10 Blackacre, and then it turns out the previous developer hadn't cleaned up the site like he was supposed to, and it means that the Environment Agency or the local council can come in like a till of the Hun and send the bill for cleanup to the house owner. That is ridiculous. So that's something that a lot of politicians don't realise. Ditto, a lot of politicians don't realise that they're screwing up the conveyancing system, but because another government department is wrapping it with red tape. They need to talk to us. They need to talk to practitioners working at the coalface. Unfortunately, some of our leaders have become detached. I think it's a point you were making too. Have become detached from those at the workface. They've forgotten what it's like to be a fee earner in these sort of conditions. The Law Society, licensed conveyancer leaders, the Institute of Chartered Legal Executives, they should be leading the respective parts of the profession to effect change with the best interest of the rule of law in mind, an ethical approach, a values-based approach. This is what they should be doing. Instead of which, a lot of the time, they become too technocratic, too remote. Then, they're not consulting their members. So these sort of considerations are driving members of the Property Lawyers Alliance to do what is right for the public, do what is right based from based on values. This is why we qualify. This is why we spent all those years qualifying. We're not there to turn a handle. We're there to do the best for our clients.
Yeah, I mean, what's an interesting point I think wrapped up in there, Stephen, actually, and I'll and Stu will no doubt comment in a moment. But something I found myself increasingly, I sometimes feel that I'm shouting into the void. I mean, I'll put posts on social media, but anybody commenting on the property market, anybody within an organisation who purports to represent elements of the property market. I think the question should always be, when were you last at the coalface doing conveyancing? When were you last at the coalface doing the job of residential conveyancing? And I think that's a key question that anybody should have to answer, or that should be put to anybody before they start purporting to represent anybody.
Absolutely.
And Stu, this is something you and I talk about quite a lot, isn't it?
Yeah. Again, I was saying with Stephen earlier, if you now look at a vast proportion of law firms, be it CLC, SRA, they're not owned by property lawyers anymore. They're owned by venture capitalists. Okay, if I look at tech companies and the influence that they've had on the profession, and again, our regulators across the board. When was the last time we actually had a meaningful conversation about something directly relating to conveyancing? Hardly ever. Hardly ever. If it's not climate, it's AML. I think we're so detached from the meaning of conveyancing than we ever have been before.
That's a good point, Stu, because one of the phenomenon which has fascinated me, and I found it really encouraging over the last couple of years, is that Property Lawyers Alliance, obviously we've appealed to those individuals from chartered surveyors and lawyers across the board who have an inclination to want to see law practice in an ethical fashion and for all the right reasons, and so on and so forth, and want to have a recognition of what's happening at the coalface. We've had offers of all sorts of very, high level assistance, if I can put it delicately, weapons grade expertise.
Stephen, I want to arc back to your AML red tape campaign, if I may, because I think there are so many avenues for property lawyers where, frankly, you, me, and Stu could chew the fat for absolutely hours. But I do think this AML red tape campaign is really, really important. I wonder, though, and I sort of slightly come back to the question I asked you maybe a while ago, in terms of, are you worried that, I don't think it's a reason not to do it, but are you worried that you might be hitting your head against a brick wall? Because, of course, the SRA, and let's face it, that's another whole can of worms to open, £64 million Axiom Mints, for example. The SRA is now taking greater and greater action against law firms, low-hanging fruit, larger and larger fines because it can, but ultimately those fines go to the Treasury. So it's actually not in the Treasury's interests to scale back on this and to have a lower expectation, because those fines, Stephen, are representing, a little but consistent and potentially ever increasing income stream.
That's a very good point. That's another point to mention the MPs with whom we're in correspondence. Interestingly, funny enough, in one sense, the SRA is not the villain of the piece. It's the next body up in the food chain. OPAS, the Office for Professional, but I can't even remember what the acronym stands for, but they're a professional body that was set up by not a professional body, a regulatory body. It's part of the FCA that was set up by the previous government to go around kicking the backsides of individual professional bodies to enforce even harder the AML regime. And one of the points we're making to the Housing Ministry and the Treasury is that we don't criticize the existence of the OPAS mechanism, but if you want a buoyant economy and a buoyant housing market, make up your mind. You either have lawyers spending weeks, sometimes months, investigating money laundering, or you pull back, you cut back on it, and you decide on a different approach. One of the things we've suggested to the Housing Ministry and the Treasury and to MPs is that it's the Property Lawyers Alliance isn't just about its campaign. It's not just about cutting back red tape, coming up with alternatives and coming back with new thinking. And one of the things we suggested was a cost-benefit analysis. Look at the evidence, which there is very little. Does the current mountain of red tape justify the disruption of the housing market? That's question number one. Question number two, can we change the thinking so a greater weight is attached to what the banks are doing? It's ironic that the banks constantly lobby the Treasury and everybody else to reduce the penalty they must pay if they're guilty of inadvertent money laundering, this, that, and the other. Whereas for lawyers, it's unlimited.
Don't even get me started on the bank, Stephen. I mean, what was it? Was it NatWest that was fined 264 million by the FCA not that long ago for allowing people to pay money into their accounts, and they brought it round the back in black bin liners. And when I say that to people on courses, they don't believe me, and I have to point them to the link. But I was just wondering, Stephen, on the OPBAS SRA point. I don't know, pure speculation. Personally, as a solicitor, as indeed, of course, Stephen, are you who've had to, pay my £90 towards the Axiom Ince debacle, and no doubt we will continue to do so. And every regulated firm last year, irrespective of its size, had to pay over £2,000 to fill that particular gap. But would you say that this absolute over focus on money laundering, which is the bit between the teeth the SRA has clearly got, because at least there's some KPIs and some metrics by which the SRA can be deemed to be successful. But do you think that sort of burden is actually meaning that organisations like the SRA are actually taking the eye off the main regulatory ball, which is then enabling debacles like Axiom Ince to happen?
I do agree with that. And I think the emphasis must switch from, if there is such an expression, from low-hanging fruit, which seems all too apparent, the high-hanging fruit. Because I think the OPBAS applies the pressure to organisations like the SRA, and it's left to the SRA to the degree and method of enforcement. But again, if we had several hours, which we don't, this all goes back to a broken Legal Services Act. Once that Act of Parliament was passed, and once the regulatory bodies were set up, it would put in place over 15, 16 years, whatever it is, a train of events where we end up paying the price for bad legislation, badly thought through legislation. I mean, I've seen all sorts of learned articles by people much more brighter than me going on and on and on about this is the future of legal relation, and this is practicality is that you get non-lawyers dominating the regulatory bodies, and therefore you're getting inappropriate mechanisms, inappropriate enforcement creeping in, and you go full circle and you end up crippling conveyancing, which can't have been the intention. Clementi, when he brought out the Legal Services Act, had a far more logical vision than the legislative bodies that implemented his vision into Parliament. And what you've got with the Legal Services Act, for example, the Legal Services Act had several regulatory objectives, but in practice what's happened is that the LSB, SRA and others have too much emphasis on the consumer objective and not enough emphasis on the rule of law objective and the other objectives. It's a complicated problem, but as far as the money laundering campaign is concerned, we want to literally slash the red tape because there's no evidence to support it, and there's no justification for supporting and enforcing it to the degree it has been enforced. Because the other unfortunate concept, it's stopping a lot of law firms, a lot of small to medium-sized law firms, from serving their communities in other ways. In other words, you might have an unprofitable legal aid section, if that still exists with certain law firms, or certain less profitable areas of work that used to be subsidised unbelievably by conveyancing. You can't do that anymore. There's large chunks of your fee earning time, large chunks of your managerial time have been taken up by money laundering red tape. It's doing so much damage in so many different ways.
Yeah, I also think, Stephen, another central issue, which I've been banging on about for years, as I say, shouting into the void, really, I'm sure. But I think it echoes some of the points you've made in terms of, I think people forget what regulated lawyers are supposed to be doing. It's a professional relationship with our clients, and we're supposed to act in the best interests of our clients. And I think when clients morphed into consumers. You know, I think it's a phrase I see in your posts, Stephen. You know, clients are not purchasing baked beans from us. And Stu, this is a point you make a lot about the, you know, the technical job that conveyancers do every day.
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, the whole thing really annoys me when, you know, I read articles and I look at the, you know, the powers that be, and we talk about conveyancing, and we never once comment on the, you know, the legal due diligence that is our job, and we never sing about our praises. You know, we never sing about the good work that we do. Is always focused on the length of time things take, or the problems that be, and it kind of dilutes what we do. And I completely agree with you, Lorraine. It's lost sight. You know, you act for your client, and you act in their best interests, which is almost impossible when you're dealing with money laundering and you've got to investigate your client, when you're sort of advising on accountancy issues like stamp duty. And we could go on and on and on, and you know, you throw the banks into that mix and the detachment they have with the profession. Now, I often wonder whether, you know, a massive step forward would almost be separate representation. I think now acting for a bank and a client almost becomes a conflict, but that might be another conversation for another day.
Yeah, I suspect it probably is. I mean, Stephen, as we said, we could talk about all this stuff for days. We could do a series, but so I suppose we ought to think about drawing to a close. But I would really appreciate it if, as sort of in closing, but you've mentioned that the Lawyers Alliance is a values-based organisation. I have to say, I think the fact of no sponsorship is actually an important point, to be frank. So what, you know, if you want to persuade any conveyancers watching this to join the Alliance, what's it about? What's the purpose of joining? What, and you know, and how do they do it? Where do they go? How much does it cost? So maybe we should conclude by, you know, spreading the word about the PLA.
That's very kind of you, Lorraine. It's a very modest fee. It's £50 per annum. We don't have any sponsors, and the whole question of sponsorship, I think, is a very important one, because it's the old joke, isn't it, about, was it one of the Marx brothers said, I've never joined a club that would have me as a member.
Yeah.
And the whole point about Property Lawyers Alliance is that we want to help provide the answer to what a modern legal profession should look like. And to us, it should be primarily about the client. It should be values-based. It should have ethics at the front and center of what it does. And it should provide an answer to the question, with the increasing impact of technology, the dangers of they're almost like a delinquent technology with AI. What does it feel like? What does it look like to practice law in 2025? And I think it's all about evolving and promoting a modern form of professionalism, where somebody once said that professionalism, being a member of a profession, is about the ethical use of asymmetric knowledge. That's a very fine piece of, you know, fine expression, but I think it's pretty accurate. We have this special training, we have this elevated status, but it's all about moving the conversation along. And I think one would say that come and join us, because we want to help keep the debate going, evolve that conversation. We want to practice law and have the right attitude. And that's what Ronald Dawkins said. One of the greatest ever legal philosophers was all about integrity is at the center of practicing law. And we would argue at the center of practicing property law. When you think of all the things that are going on in conveyancing, referral fees and over-legislated acts like the Building Safety Act and everything else, we want to be doing law for the right reasons and provide that safe harbor for clients, so that when they pay their fee, the clients know, a bit like the old Coldplay record, we give them what they need, not what they want.
So, Stephen, how do property lawyers, and I suppose, you know, that would be, you know, paralegals, support staff, qualified lawyers, anybody interested, how do they find you? How do they find the PLA, and how do they pay their £50 fee?
Well, what I'll do, because I can't remember it off the top of my head, I'll give you the website details and so on. You simply go on the website and or you ping our vice chair Colin on his email, and he'll send you all the membership details. We're a very relaxed body. We're very comfortable in each other's company, because we're doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah, we had a lovely chat, Stephen, with Colin a while ago, specifically, really, mostly around the PIF, and I think one of the best phrases I've ever heard from any guest ever is when Colin sat there, and in his rather sort of quiet, sort of sanguine sort of way, actually, he said, "Oh yes, it was I think it was the Property Information Form 5th edition that radicalised me," and I think that's just one of the best things I've ever heard. But well, I think, as I say, we could probably sit here all day, Stephen. But you know, Stu and I would like to thank you very much for joining us. And genuinely, actually, don't we, Stu, wish you well with the AML campaign.
Absolutely.
Very kind of you, and we're going to need all the help we can get.
Yeah, not at all, Stephen, and I'm sure we'd be delighted to invite you back. So thanks for
joining.
Very kind.
Thank you very much.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.